Hey, American literature students. It is Friday, April the 24th, and today we're going to jump into Act 2 of The Crucible. I don't have a whole lot to say before we read. I do want to remind you about the essential questions that we're going to be discussing with this play. Groupthink and hysteria. How do those two ideas, which we discussed yesterday for Act 1, how do they hurt society? How do they harm and obstruct the democratic process? The ideal purpose of law, what is it? And how does human depravity limit the justice that happens within society? And finally, to what extent is one's own reputation and name worth fighting to protect? Also, before we read, just a few thoughts and ideas to focus on. I want you to notice carefully stage directions in this particular act, at least part 1 of Act 2. There are many subtle details that you're going to miss unless you're focusing on the stage directions. Also, you're going to find out early on in Act 2 that this takes place 8 days, so just over a week after Act 1. And the world of Salem has changed significantly in that short period of time. And then finally, today is going to focus primarily on the marriage between John and Elizabeth Proctor. We've met John Proctor already in Act 1, and we know that there might have been an adulterous relationship, right? He might have had an affair with Abigail Williams. Well, we're going to meet his wife. We're going to meet Elizabeth. And just think about how you might describe their relationship. All right, reading time. Pause the video at this point. You're going to go into the text and read pages 49 through 70, so just about 21 pages. You're going to stop after page 70. It might feel kind of abrupt right in the middle of the act. That way you don't have too much of a reading assignment for Act 2. We'll finish it up on Monday. You're also going to complete your reading observation assignment. Remember, that's 4 total observations, 1 per category. So 1 question, 1 visual or setting detail, 1 character detail, and 1 line or passage associated with the theme. So pause the video here, read, complete your assignment, turn it in, and I'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about Act 2, at least the first part of Act 2. And as we talk about it, there are 4 important details and ideas we're going to discuss, 4 key scenes. We're going to talk about the Proctor's marriage and kind of the tension, this underlying tension that bubbles up to the surface at points that I want to get into. The progress of the trial, right? So now we've had people accused of witchcraft. So how has this trial progressed over the last 8 days? Mary Warren, this very minor character in Act 1, becomes more prominent as the play progresses. What is she like now? How has she changed and transformed? And then Reverend Hale, we get to see him again. He kind of parachutes into the Proctor household towards the end of the section today. What's he doing there and what's going on with him? So we're going to start with some subtlety in the stage directions. I told you to pay attention to these. And as we jump over to Act 2, so page 49 in the text, there's just this opening scene, this opening direction when Proctor enters from working on the farm, right? And he notices certain things, right? It's a low, dark living room, right? We see him enter. He glances about the room. He continues to the fireplace. He leans the gun against the wall. He swings a pot out of the fire and smells it. Now that's dinner, right? He lifts the ladle and tastes. He is not quite pleased, right? He takes a pinch of salt and adds drops into the pot. Again, this very subtle detail. He's unhappy with the cooking that his wife is doing. Now, I think Arthur Miller probably dropped that little detail in just to highlight some of the tension in their marriage. There's other details that talk about that tension within the marriage. It's actually something that Proctor says, right? He tells her on page 51, hey, Elizabeth, you should bring some flowers into the house, right? You should bring some life into this house. She's like, oh, I forgot, I will tomorrow. And he says, it's winter in here yet. Now, I'm going to tell you, I think that this is being used symbolically, right? That Arthur Miller is saying it's winter, not just physically in the decoration of our home, but it's winter, it's cold in the relationship that I have, John Proctor, with you, Elizabeth Proctor. Our marriage is cold. It is lifeless. It is loveless. And it's not that Proctor doesn't want to be a good husband, right? If you go back to page 50, he says at the very bottom of the page, would something please you? Buying this cow, would it please you? Aye, it would, right? Yes, it would. I mean to please you, Elizabeth. Right? He wants to be a good, dutiful husband, right? He gets up, goes to her, kisses her, she receives it, right? With a certain disappointment, he returns to the table. Like, he wants his marriage to be ideal. He wants there to be this love, but there's something blocking him. And I think we find out later in the act, in pages 54 and 55, what that might be. That there's this guilt. There's this guilt that he carries because of what he's done. And Elizabeth isn't totally aware necessarily, but you see that come up. He asks Elizabeth, "You doubt me, right? Right?" She had said, "You earn, right, suspicion. I'll not have your suspicion anymore, right? Then don't earn it. You doubt me? John, if it were not Abigail that you must hurt, would you falter now?" And she doesn't necessarily know, but she has some suspicions that Abigail might have been the problem, right? Might have been the problem. He says later on this page, "You forget nothing and you forgive nothing. Learn charity, woman." Like, forgive me. I know I might have done something wrong, but you have to forgive. You have to forgive. Right? But Elizabeth, she says, "It's not me judging you, John. I do not judge you." Page 55. "It's the magistrate, the judge that sits in your heart that judges you. I've never thought you but a good man, John, only somewhat bewildered." And then his response to her, and this is kind of a funny response, and he's actually laughing as he says this, "Oh, Elizabeth, your justice would freeze beer," right? Your justice is so cold. Your justice is so cold that it would make even an alcoholic beverage freeze, which it's very difficult for those things to freeze. So this tension is clearly there in their marriage. Proctor feels judged by Elizabeth. Elizabeth is saying, "I'm not judging you. It's your own heart. It's your own conscience that's judging you, John. And in fact, I respect you, John. I admire you." Think about how guilt sometimes prevents us from accepting the forgiveness that we would want to have. All right, enough about that. Let's go to the progress of the trial. We're going to find some details out about how the trial has progressed so far. Flip to a different color. And this is going to be a lot with what Mary Warren is going to share as well. Okay, so now we know that there's a proper court, right? They've sent 4 judges out of Boston, weighty magistrates of the general court. Okay, Proctor's like, she's mad. There'll be 14 people in jail now. This is according to Elizabeth, right? And they'll be tried, and the court will have power to hang them too. So there's been a progression. There's been a change. Abigail and the other girls are going into court, and whenever they go into court, they command an incredible amount of authority for young, unmarried, non-landowning girls. The bottom of page 52. When Abigail brings the girls into court, where she walks, the crowd will part like the sea for Israel. Right? I mean, that's a great image as well. Just like Moses parts the Red Sea with the power of God, so Abigail can part a crowd. She can separate a crowd. What's interesting is that Elizabeth, in this kind of scene of tension between them in their marriage, she tells Proctor to do something, right? John, I think they must be told, right? I would go now, John, let you go tonight. You have to go and tell them, you have to go and speak what you know about Abigail Williams, that she's a fraud, that she's a fake, that she is telling lies. John, it's up to you. Elizabeth is playing with him. So she gives him this task. All right, let's go to Mary Warren, because Mary Warren's also an interesting little character, right? And again, there's some subtle details the way that Mary Warren is described. Okay, page 52, we're just going to stay right here. Okay, Mary Warren's there today at the top of the page. She's at court. Why would you let her? You heard me forbid her to go to Salem anymore. I couldn't stop her, right? Elizabeth, you're in charge here, not Mary Warren. She frightened all my strength away. How may that mouse frighten you, Elizabeth? You... And Elizabeth's response, it's a mouse no more. So we hear in this conversation between Elizabeth and John, there's been a change in Mary Warren. Right? There's been a change in her. She's feeling stronger, more powerful, more empowered by the courts. And as we skip ahead to page 56, we can look at some of the reasons why. We find out from Mary Warren, it's not just 14 women, middle of the page. No, sir, there be 39 now. 39 people in a small colonial village over the course of 8 days have been accused of witchcraft and brought before the court. Wow. Right? The power that these girls have, the power that they wield over there. And what's important to notice is the way that Mary Warren describes the feeling that she's having during her bewitching episodes. Right? She describes the feeling of being bewitched. Page 57, Elizabeth says, I never heard you mention before something about any of these people trying to control you. Sarah Good is who they're talking about here. Right? I never knew it before. Right? I didn't feel this before. But then she sits there denying, and I feel a misty coldness climbing up my back, and the skin of my skull begin to creep, and I feel a clamp around my neck, and I cannot breathe air. And then I hear a voice, a screaming voice, and it were my voice. All at once I remember everything she'd done to me. So Mary Warren is describing what she has testified to in the court of law as the way that Sarah Good, in this case, has bewitched her. And the question you have to consider as a reader, and really the question that these audience members in the court, or in this case, John and Elizabeth Proctor, should be asking themselves, is this real or is this imagined? Is this real or is this hysterical? Is this hysteria taking over Mary Warren? Right? Now, John Proctor's not going to have any of this, right? He's not dealing with this. Okay? He's like, it's strange work for a Christian girl to hang old women, right? Like page 58, page 59 is where we are now. He's like, I'm not going for this, Mary Warren. This is my house. You're my servant. I pay you. You obey me, right? You are obedient to me. So I'm not dealing with you in this garbage anymore, right? He's like, you must see that I'm doing God's work, right? I'll be gone every day for some time. I'm an official of the court. And Proctor's like, I'll official you. He strides to the mantle and takes down a whip. Oh yeah, right? He's going to beat her. But Mary Warren, she stands up to him. I'm not going to stand a whipping anymore. I'm not a quiet little mouse anymore. I've been empowered. I'm strong. You can't tell me what to do. And not only does she stand up to the Proctors, and John Proctor specifically, further, she blackmails him, right? This is blackmail that she commits on pages 60 and 61, right? Mary Warren begins to talk about Elizabeth. She begins to talk about Elizabeth. I guess it's not 61. Where's the blackmail happening? Yeah. It's right there. Sorry, guys. I lost my place. One second. Well, essentially what you should get from the act, and I can't find it right now, but it's okay. You can figure it out, I'm sure, is that Mary Warren's going to protect the Proctors. She's going to protect Elizabeth from being accused. And so she uses that as a way to get what she wants. All right, let's skip ahead to page 63, where Reverend Hale enters. Reverend Hale is coming as a courtesy. Elizabeth's name has come up in court, right? He's coming on his own without the court's authority, page 63. Your wife's name is mentioned in court. Mary Warren told us that. We know that, she mentioned that to us. And so what he wants to do is try to help them help themselves. Rather than being accused and brought before the court, he's like, there's going to be some signs of witchcraft that are going to come up. And I want to test to see if you fall short of those so that you can protect yourself. Right? Now, he asks John Proctor to name the 10 Commandments. Right? It's one of the things that's a test. And Proctor, on page 67, he begins naming them, right here at the top of the page. Well, he can only name 9. And the one that he misses, ironically enough, is adultery. It's the one that he can't remember. And Hale actually has a great line. He says, theology, sir, is a fortress. No crack in a fortress may be accounted small. Right? Like, yeah, maybe you didn't know that commandment about not committing adultery, John, and maybe that's why you did. So if you would have figured that out, at least in your mind, you would have been protected from the action that you took. Now, Proctor questions pretty severely this whole system of justice that's going on, right? He wonders about Reverend Hale, right? He wonders why a steady-minded minister as you will suspicion such a woman that never lied and cannot, and the world knows she cannot. And like, why, Reverend Hale, are you giving yourself over to this court that is clearly corrupt, that is clearly fraudulent, that is clearly basing 39 arrests on the testimony of these hysterical young women? Reverend Hale's not quite ready to throw the court out yet, but he certainly begins questioning it, and Proctor kind of pushes those questions. And that's really where we left off for the first part of Act 2. We'll see kind of the summation of that, but there was one other quote I wanted to just draw your attention to, and it's something that Elizabeth says on page 62, and that'll be what we close with today. She has an arrow in you yet, John Proctor, and you know it well. Now, who's the she she's talking about here? Well, it's none other than Abigail Williams. Right? Abigail Williams is the one who has an arrow in John. And what she means by that is not literally that there's an arrow sticking out of John Proctor. Of course we know that. What she means is figuratively that this arrow is causing her to control John. Right? She can twist and maneuver John however she wants to. That her, Abigail's talons are still in him. That he still feels a soft spot for her. And it's not going to be easy for him to go and destroy Abigail Williams and her reputation. All right, well, that's it for Act 2, at least the first part of Act 2. We'll pick up on Monday with the second half of Act 2, and we'll see the culmination to this particular scene. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you on Monday.